Have you ever held on to something so tightly, convinced that if you just tried a little harder, it would stay? Maybe it was a friendship that once felt unbreakable, a relationship you believed was meant to last, or a connection that felt like home until one day it didn't. You start feeling the shift, sensing the distance, but instead of letting go, you fight, you hold on, even when everything in you knows it's slipping away. But what if I told you that the very thing you're gripping onto is what's keeping you from stepping into something greater? What if the people who walked away, the ones who faded out, the ones who hurt you, weren't meant to be permanent in your story? What if their absence isn't a loss, but a setup for something more? I know letting go is painful. I know watching someone leave when you thought they'd stay feels like a wound that won't heal. But what if their exit is part of a bigger plan? What if instead of breaking you, it's actually making room for the next version of you? The one who's stronger, wiser, and finally ready for what's ahead. When people leave your life, it can feel like a storm rolling in out of nowhere. One moment, everything seems stable, secure, and predictable. The next, you're left standing in the middle of uncertainty, questioning what went wrong. But what if I told you that separation is not punishment, but preparation? What if I told you that every exit, every lost connection, every unexpected goodbye is setting the stage for something greater? It's easy to hold on to people simply because they've been there for a long time. Familiarity has a way of making us believe that longevity equals purpose. That just because someone has walked with us through one season, they are meant to walk with us through all of them. But life doesn't work that way. Some people were never meant to be permanent fixtures in your journey. They were meant to be lessons, stepping stones, or temporary assignments to help you grow into who you're becoming. And when their time in your life is up, no amount of pleading, chasing, or holding on will change that. Imagine a gardener tending to a tree. There comes a time when branches have to be pruned, not because they're useless, but because they've served their purpose. If they stay too long, they can hinder the tree's ability to grow stronger, to stretch toward the sunlight, to produce new fruit. The same principle applies to your life. Some relationships, friendships, and connections were useful for a time, but if you cling to them beyond their season, they begin to stunt your growth. When separation happens, it's often because you're being prepared for something that requires a new version of you. Growth demands transformation, and transformation requires shedding old layers. If you're going to step into a greater calling, you cannot carry everything and everyone with you. Some people are comfortable with the version of you that you've outgrown. They liked you before the evolution, before the shift, before you started realizing your worth and setting boundaries. And the moment you start moving differently, they either resist your change or quietly remove themselves. At first, it may feel like a betrayal. You might find yourself questioning why someone who once claimed to care so deeply could leave so easily. But what if their leaving wasn't a loss, but a divine decision? What if their absence was actually making space for what's coming next? Sometimes we don't recognize that certain people were holding us back until we feel the weight lift after they're gone. The drama, the inconsistency, the emotional exhaustion, things you thought were normal suddenly disappear, and you realize you have more peace, more clarity, more energy to focus on what truly matters. Think about how much time and energy you've spent trying to hold on to people who were already slipping away, trying to force conversations that no longer flow, trying to maintain relationships that took more from you than they gave. Sometimes we are so afraid of change that we settle for connections that drain us just because we don't want to be alone. But loneliness is not the enemy. Sometimes separation is the only way to break free from cycles that were keeping you stagnant. If you are always surrounded by familiar voices, you may never hear the new direction being whispered into your spirit. If you are always entangled in relationships that no longer serve you, you may never have the space to build ones that truly uplift you. When people walk away, don't waste your energy trying to convince them to stay. Let them go with grace, knowing that their chapter in your story was never meant to be the whole book. Preparation is never comfortable. The stretching, the breaking away, the pruning, it all feels unnatural in the moment. But if you resist the process, you resist your own growth. When something is being removed, it is because it is no longer necessary for where you are going. If you can embrace that, you will start to see these endings not as setbacks, but as setups. You will stop seeing rejection as an attack and start seeing it as redirection. The version of you that you are stepping into requires space. It requires clarity. It requires freedom from the past so that you can fully embrace what's ahead. And sometimes the only way to get there is through separation. Not everyone is meant to walk with you forever. It's a difficult truth to accept because we naturally want the people we love, the ones who have been there through struggles and celebrations, to stay by our side. But life has a way of revealing that some relationships are only meant for a season. And when that season ends, we have to be willing to let them go. Holding on to people who are no longer aligned with our growth doesn't just delay our journey. It can keep us from stepping into the very thing we were destined for. There are moments in life when we start to sense a shift. The conversations don't feel the same, the connection begins to fade, and the energy that once felt effortless now feels forced. It's not that anything went terribly wrong, it's simply that you are evolving, and not everyone is meant to evolve with you. When you start growing spiritually, emotionally, mentally, you begin to notice that some people were connected to the old version of you. They were drawn to who you were, not who you're becoming. And the tension arises when you try to bring them along for a journey they were never meant to take. Imagine climbing a mountain with a heavy backpack. In the beginning, everything seems manageable, but as the elevation rises and the terrain becomes more challenging, the weight on your back begins to slow you down. You reach a point where you have to make a decision. Either you release some of what you're carrying, or you stay stuck at the same level. The same applies to life. Not everyone can handle the altitude of your growth. Some people were comfortable when you were on level ground, but they weren't built to climb with you. This is where many people struggle. They try to force relationships that have already run their course. They feel obligated to stay connected to people out of guilt, loyalty, or fear of being alone. But when someone's role in your life is finished, keeping them around doesn't help either of you. It only creates resentment, frustration, and stagnation. You can't hold on to the past while reaching for the future. Some friendships, relationships, and connections were only meant to serve a specific purpose. Once that purpose is fulfilled, the natural course is for them to end. This doesn't mean that every person who leaves your life was bad for you. Some people were good to you, but they were not good for your next chapter. Some friendships were meaningful, but they were never meant to last a lifetime. Some relationships helped you heal, but they weren't meant to carry you forward. The challenge is recognizing when to stop holding on and to trust that the absence of certain people is making space for what's next. Often we struggle with this because we assume that letting go means we have to feel bitter, hurt, or abandoned. But what if we shifted our perspective? What if we saw endings as necessary transitions rather than painful losses? What if we realize that the absence of certain people is actually protecting us from attachments that would only hold us back? Growth requires us to be intentional about who we allow in our space. Not everyone deserves access to the new version of you. One of the hardest lessons to learn is that you can love someone deeply and still outgrow them. You can appreciate everything they've done for you and still understand that your journey is leading you in different directions. It doesn't mean there's animosity or negativity. It simply means that your paths are no longer aligned, and that's okay. Too often we make the mistake of thinking that just because someone was there in our past, they have to be in our future. But some people were only meant to teach us something, to challenge us, to show us a different perspective. When their role in our life is complete, we have to be willing to accept that and move forward. Fighting to keep someone in your life when their season is over only creates unnecessary struggle. Growth is a lonely process at times. It requires making hard decisions, setting boundaries, and trusting that what is meant for you will always find you. When certain people start to fade away, it's not always because something went wrong. Sometimes it's simply because their presence in your life was tied to a specific version of you. And as you evolve, so does your circle. The ones who are meant to be in your life will adjust to your growth, and the ones who resist it will naturally drift away. Instead of chasing what's leaving, focus on preparing for what's coming. Rejection is one of the most painful experiences a person can go through. It makes you question your worth, your choices, and sometimes even your purpose. Whether it comes from a friend who suddenly distances themselves, a relationship that ends unexpectedly, or an opportunity that slips through your fingers, rejection can feel like a personal attack. But what if rejection isn't actually meant to hurt you? What if it's meant to guide you? What if every door that closes is really pushing you in the right direction? There are moments in life when you desperately want something to work. You invest your time, your energy, your love, and your hope into a relationship, a job, or a dream, believing that it's meant for you, and then without warning, it falls apart. The person you trusted walks away. The job you thought was secure lets you go. The door you were knocking on refuses to open. It's in those moments that frustration creeps in. And you start asking why. You wonder what you did wrong, what you could have done differently, and why things couldn't have just worked out the way you planned. But what if you're asking the wrong questions? Instead of asking, why did this happen to me? What if you started asking, what is this leading me to? Because sometimes what feels like rejection is actually redirection. Sometimes the very thing you're crying over is the very thing that was standing in the way of your real breakthrough. When you're focused on what's leaving, you might not notice what's coming. Think about how many times you tried to hold on to something that wasn't good for you. How many times did you chase after a person who had already shown you they weren't meant to stay? How many times did you force a situation that was never truly meant for you? Looking back, haven't there been moments where you were grateful that something didn't work out? Maybe that job you didn't get made room for a better opportunity. Maybe that relationship that ended saved you from years of heartache. Maybe that friendship that drifted apart protected you from a betrayal you never saw coming. We don't always get to see the full picture in the moment. All we see is the pain, the confusion, and the disappointment. But if you take a step back, you'll realize that rejection often happens when something is no longer aligned with where you're supposed to go. You may not understand it immediately, but in time, clarity will come. That door closed because you were meant to walk through a different one. That person left because their presence would have delayed your growth. That opportunity passed you by because something greater was waiting for you. It's hard to accept rejection when you're in the middle of it because it feels personal. You start wondering if you weren't good enough, if you didn't measure up, if you could have done something to change the outcome. But rejection isn't always about you. Sometimes it's about what's meant for you. And what is meant for you will never require you to beg for it, force it, or lose yourself trying to hold on to it. When you understand that rejection is actually redirection, you stop seeing it as a loss and start seeing it as protection. You stop trying to force things that aren't meant to fit in your life. You stop chasing people who were never supposed to stay. You stop settling for situations that don't align with your purpose. Every time something doesn't go the way you planned, you have a choice. You can either let it break you, or you can trust that it's leading you towards something better. The beauty of rejection is that it clears space. It removes distractions. It forces you to look at yourself, to realign with your purpose, and to trust that there's a plan bigger than what you can see. It may not feel good in the moment, but if you can shift your perspective, you'll see that rejection isn't the end of the road. It's just a necessary detour to your real destination. Growth is uncomfortable. It stretches you, pulls you out of your comfort zone, and demands that you release the things that no longer serve you. One of the hardest parts of growing is realizing that some people can't go with you. You may have started the journey together, but at some point, the road shifts. The conversations don't feel the same. The energy changes. The connection that once felt natural now feels forced. You begin to notice that what once uplifted you now drains you, and what once felt aligned now feels off balance. When you experience this shift, it can be tempting to hold on. You remind yourself of all the memories, all the shared experiences, all the love that existed in the past. But the past cannot be the reason you hold on to something that no longer fits where you're going. Just because someone was good for one chapter of your life does not mean they are meant to be in the next. And if you keep trying to drag them along, you'll only slow yourself down. Think about a hot air balloon. It's designed to rise, to soar above the ground and travel to new heights. But before it can take off, it has to release the sandbags holding it down. Without letting go of that extra weight, it will never get off the ground. The same is true in life. Sometimes the reason you feel stuck isn't because you aren't capable, but because you are carrying things and people that are keeping you from rising. Not everyone is meant to grow with you. Some people are comfortable where they are. They don't want to stretch. They don't want to challenge themselves. They want to remain in the same patterns, the same cycles, the same mindset. And if you are committed to growth, you cannot afford to stay in spaces that no longer challenge or inspire you. The conversations you engage in, the company you keep, the environments you stay in, all of these things either push you forward or pull you backward. Sometimes people will distance themselves from you not because they don't care, but because they are not ready for the version of you that you are becoming. Your growth reminds them of their own stagnation. Your progress makes them question their own decisions. And instead of celebrating you, they begin to resent you. Instead of supporting you, they start questioning why you are changing. It's not that you've done anything wrong. It's that your evolution is exposing their unwillingness to evolve. It hurts when people who once supported you begin to withdraw. It's painful when those you thought would be by your side forever suddenly seem distant. But the truth is, growth requires separation. You cannot stay connected to everything and everyone while stepping into a new season. You have to make peace with the fact that some relationships will naturally fade, and that's okay. When someone is meant to be in your life, they will grow with you. They will adjust, evolve, and continue to be aligned with your journey. But when they are not meant to go where you're going, they will resist, pull away, or fade out of your life. One of the biggest challenges in growth is accepting that you cannot shrink yourself to make other people comfortable. You cannot dim your light to keep others from feeling insecure. You cannot pause your journey because someone else is afraid to start theirs. You have to be willing to keep moving even when it means leaving behind people you love, because the truth is, if they truly belonged in your next season, they would have the capacity to grow with you. Growth isn't just about reaching new levels, it's about alignment. It's about making sure that the people around you reflect where you are headed, not just where you've been. When you surround yourself with people who are also growing, who are also striving, who are also pushing themselves to be better, your potential expands. But when you hold on to people who are comfortable with stagnation, you risk limiting yourself just to make them feel secure. When you start growing, don't be surprised if certain people start falling away. Don't be alarmed if the invitations stop coming, if the conversations become less frequent, if the energy shifts. It's not a sign that you've done something wrong. It's a sign that you are outgrowing what no longer serves you, and that's exactly what growth is supposed to do. Letting go of someone you care about is never easy. The emotional attachment, the memories, the time invested, all of it makes walking away feel like a loss. But sometimes the real loss is staying in a space that no longer nurtures your soul. The real pain isn't in leaving, but in holding on to something that has already run its course. We often cling to relationships, friendships, and situations out of fear. Fear of change, fear of loneliness, fear of the unknown. But if we truly understood that letting go isn't about losing, but about making space for something greater, we would approach it differently. When someone is removed from your life, it's easy to focus on the void they leave behind. You replay conversations, wondering what you could have done differently. You analyze the situation, searching for answers that may never come. But what if the removal wasn't about what you lost, but about what you were gaining? What if that absence was creating room for something you never even imagined? Growth requires space. Healing requires space. And sometimes that space can only be created through the absence of what you once thought you needed. There are people in your life right now who are connected to your past, but not your future. They were there for a specific season, and that season served its purpose. Maybe they helped you through a difficult time. Maybe they taught you a valuable lesson. Maybe they showed you something about yourself that you needed to see. But just because someone played an important role in one part of your journey doesn't mean they are meant to be in every part of it. Some people were only ever meant to be temporary. The challenge is that we don't always recognize when a season has ended. We hold on longer than we should, ignoring the signs, making excuses, convincing ourselves that things will go back to the way they used to be. But deep down, we know the truth. We know when a friendship has become one-sided. We know when a relationship is draining us more than it's fulfilling us. We know when we're staying out of habit rather than genuine connection. And yet we struggle to let go because we equate letting go with failure. But what if we shifted our perspective? What if we saw letting go as an act of trust rather than a sign of defeat? What if we understood that walking away from what no longer serves us isn't about giving up, but about making room for something better? When you release what isn't meant for you, you create space for what is. But as long as you keep holding on to what's not working, your hands are too full to receive what's truly meant for you. Letting go is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a series of choices, a daily commitment to choosing yourself, your peace, your growth. Some days will be harder than others. You'll have moments where you miss them, where you wonder if you made the right decision, where nostalgia tries to pull you back. But growth means trusting the process, even when it hurts. It means believing that if someone was truly meant to be in your life, they wouldn't have left. And if they did leave, then maybe their role in your story was already complete. The hardest part about letting go isn't always the person. It's the version of yourself that existed with them. It's the memories, the identity, the sense of belonging that came with that connection. But you cannot grow into your next season while clinging to the past. You cannot embrace who you're becoming if you refuse to release who you used to be. Letting go isn't just about people. It's about shedding old versions of yourself, old habits, old mindsets that no longer serve you. There is peace in releasing what was never meant to stay. There is freedom in knowing that what is truly aligned with you will never require you to hold on so tightly. When someone exits your life, instead of mourning the loss, start asking yourself, what is this making room for? Because sometimes the absence of one thing is the very thing that makes space for what you've been waiting for all along. Healing doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it's loud and obvious with breakthrough moments that change everything in an instant. Other times it's quiet, slow, and almost unnoticeable, happening in the small decisions you make every day. The hardest part about healing is that it requires you to face what hurt you, acknowledge what you lost, and still choose to move forward even when you don't have all the answers. And when people are removed from your life, healing often means accepting that their absence is a part of your journey, not a mistake. When someone leaves, whether through betrayal, distance, or simply growing apart, the space they leave behind can feel like an open wound. You replay moments, searching for signs you might have missed, wondering if you could have done something differently. You go through cycles of grief, first denying the reality of their absence, then feeling anger, sadness, and eventually exhaustion from carrying the weight of it all. But true healing begins the moment you stop looking at their absence as something that broke you and start seeing it as something that is making you whole. We often think of healing as getting over something or forgetting about it. But real healing isn't about erasing the pain. It's about transforming it. It's about using every heartbreak, every disappointment, every loss as a stepping stone toward becoming stronger, wiser, and more at peace with yourself. The people who left played their role. They served a purpose. Whether they taught you a lesson, revealed a weakness, or forced you to look deeper into yourself, their departure wasn't an accident. Some people come into your life to love you, others to teach you, and some to push you towards something greater. But no matter how they left, their absence is not a reflection of your worth. One of the biggest struggles in healing is resisting the urge to go back. When you are in pain, nostalgia has a way of distorting the past, making you forget why things ended in the first place. You remember the good moments, the laughter, the connection, and you start to convince yourself that maybe you overreacted, maybe you should have fought harder, maybe you should have stayed. But growth means trusting the version of yourself that made the decision to walk away. It means believing that if something was meant to last, it wouldn't require you to lower your standards, betray yourself, or beg for the bare minimum. Healing is also about reclaiming the parts of yourself that you lost in the process. Sometimes when you're deeply connected to someone, you give them pieces of yourself without even realizing it. You start to mirror their behaviors, adjust your needs to fit theirs, and compromise in ways that shrink you. And when they leave, it can feel like they took a part of you with them. But healing reminds you that no one has the power to take away who you are. You were whole before they arrived, and you are whole even after they leave. Another challenge in healing is learning to forgive not just the person who hurt you, but yourself. Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing their behavior or pretending like the pain didn't happen. It means accepting that the past cannot be changed and choosing to release the bitterness so it doesn't consume you. And just as important as forgiving them is forgiving yourself for the things you didn't know then, for the times you settled, for the times you ignored the warning signs. Healing happens when you stop punishing yourself for the lessons you had to learn. It's easy to think that healing means everything will suddenly make sense, that one day you'll wake up and never feel the sting of what happened. But healing is a process, not a destination. Some days you'll feel strong and at peace, and other days the memories will resurface and the pain will feel fresh again. But with every passing day, as you choose to let go, as you choose to trust the process, as you choose yourself, you'll realize that healing isn't about going back to who you were before. It's about becoming someone even stronger, someone who is no longer defined by what they lost, but by what they've gained. Letting go is never easy. It stretches you, challenges you, and forces you to confront parts of yourself that you'd rather ignore. But when people leave your life, it isn't a punishment, it's preparation. Every goodbye, every loss, every unexpected departure is shaping you for something greater. It's creating space for new relationships, deeper connections, and the growth that was never possible while you were holding on to what no longer served you. You don't have to chase what is meant for you. You don't have to beg people to stay. The right people, the ones truly aligned with your journey, will walk with you, not away from you. And when someone exits, instead of mourning what's lost, trust that something better is on the way, because nothing that is truly meant for you will require you to shrink yourself, lose yourself, or hold on tighter than you should. So stand tall, move forward, embrace the lessons, cherish the memories, and trust the process. What you lost is nothing compared to what's ahead. You are not alone. You are not abandoned. You are being prepared for a season you can't even imagine yet.